I was gonna talk about She-Ra.
You must be Glimmer's mother. I can tell by the way your voice grows shrill when you scream.
Shadow Weaver left me. For you. All of this happened because of you. Ketra? Ketra, please, you have to listen!
We'll get her back, Angie. And then everything will be perfect again.
This is perfect, my love. But it's not real.
And we will talk about She-Ra. But also, I just saw the Lighthouse?
And plunges right through your gullet!
So, in case you've been living under a film rock, The Lighthouse is a 2019 film by Robert Eggers, the same man who directed The Vavitch, and you should absolutely know my opinion on The Vavitch. He directed and wrote it with his brother Max, which is adorable, but given the content of the film, somewhat disturbing. I wish I could provide a better background for The Lighthouse, but it's one of those things that defies genres. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go and purchase this film right now. Spend time and money on this film, then watch it and report back. Here is the timestamp. Write it in Sharpie on your hand and watch The Lighthouse and then come back and finish this. If The Lighthouse is spoiled in any significant way for you, it will make your life worse in the long run. I guarantee it. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Alright, I want to preface this by saying that The Lighthouse is a complicated project. There are dozens of radically different but equally viable interpretations of the film right down to the thesis. The extent to which the images on screen are happening is a point of contention. I'm going with the broad thematic interpretation because what is important to me when examining art is the interactions of the various elements and what those interactions are supposed to represent. Like, for example, Humpty Dumpty could be about an egg falling off a wall, or it could be about hubris. What's more interesting? My understanding is that The Lighthouse concerned itself primarily with inevitability, spirituality, and the persistence of life. In other words, things happen, we face those things in questionable ways, and life continues on regardless. And yes, this time I'm going back to chapters. The director, Eggman, appears to have some preoccupation with fate. This is the strongest connection between Eggers and Ari Aster. Ari Aster? Ari Aster? Ari Oster? Ari? Harry, who is one of the other prominent names in psychological horror at the moment. This tangent was brought to you by Watch Hereditary, Do It Now. Anyway, we first get hints of this in The Vavitch. The family was doomed from the start of the film, either because of their paranoia or because of a legitimate paranormal threat. The same can be said for The Lighthouse. Our two main characters, who, due to some tomfoolery and shenaniganizing later in the film, I will refer to as Edward and the Green Goblin, arrive at the island with the lighthouse in the first scene. They do not speak to one another or to the crew that unloads their belongings. In fact, they don't look at one another or at the crew in this entire first scene. We watch these two unnamed characters stare just beyond the camera, presumably watching their only connection to the world vanish into the mist. This is already where the reality of the film is called into question. It's completely viable to consider the lighthouse itself a metaphor for another situation, such as an abusive household or a period of emotional crisis. It could be a chapel perilous, in which the characters' beliefs are tested, and they will leave it either confirmed in their suppositions or non-believers. Alternatively, perhaps, these two were never dropped off here at all, a theory that's sort of supported later in the film.
But Tom Soward, I know what you've done.
I think the evidence is plenty strong that this scene is legitimate. For the purposes of this interpretation, the characters were dropped off here by a ferry for the purpose of attending the lighthouse. Okay? Okay, I promise I will not do this with any other scene in the movie. Okay? Okay. Ooh, you can taste the whey. Anyway, the reason I bring up that first scene is because of the lack of information. The two characters weren't forced into this situation. They appear to know one another even though we don't know either of them, and they get right to work maintaining the lighthouse. This situation was impossible to avoid, both in a literal sense according to what we know so far, and in a meta sense, because that's how narrative works, and go watch Patricia Taxon's video on Funny Games. The mood of isolation, which is imperative to the film, is only created because there are no real options for the characters to avoid it. Look at that knowing little smirk. This persistent sense of inevitability continues throughout the film, exacerbated by what may seem like obvious foreshadowing. For example, Gobbo tells Edward,
Bad luck to kill a seabird.
and of course in the back of your mind you're thinking, oh, he's going to do that thing. This is a horror movie and it's going to do a curse. And of course, you are 100% correct. He murders the 9 hells out of a bird. Is this for kids, Kappa? But although I'll have more to say about that in the next section, what I want to get across now is that that obviousness is not unintentional. You are supposed to see it coming, because you can do nothing to prevent it. Neither can the characters. We get more support of this when one of the other primary themes, sexual frustration, manifests itself in the Frena lens.
Freno.
Only Goblord here is able to access the light, and Sparkles, who is infinitely horny, goes up every few nights to hear the worst thing in the world, Willem Dafoe being pleasured by an abstract concept. However, since this theme is one of the main points of contention between the two, what do you think will happen? You know stories. You're a savvy film fella. Act 3 conflict will lead to Sir Cullen accessing the MacGuffin. And you're right, of course. You're 100% correct. Again, the conflict and its quote-unquote resolution is inevitable, and nothing any of the characters do can prevent it. You, as the audience, certainly can't. But what's most important about this theme is that bad things happen. Duh, I hear you say, from far away and in the future because of my superhearing. Of course, you say, things are going to go wrong in something marketed as a psychological horror. And what is brilliant about this film is how the bad things happen. In the guise of hubris, madness, drunken reveling, and the tentative friendship that comes along with it, bad things are always happening. Sometimes the precise direction the film is going to go is obscured by the possibility of reconciliation, but the bad things are inevitable. This can be said for any film, of course, because of what conflict is. However, in The Lighthouse, the inevitability of conflict is written into the text and also into the psychology of the characters. So by spirituality here, I don't mean Buddhism or whatever. I mean folk superstition. Remember, this film is a period piece set in the mid to late 19th century. This is the height of seafaring superstition, and also somewhat coincidentally dark romanticism and Gothicism. We just left the whaling era if we're not still in it. Goblin here especially has black cat, broken mirror, walking under ladder level superstitions.
Bad luck to kill a seabird.
The first hint we get of this paranormalism is the token, the fetish. The fetish of a mermaid, which is a deeply superstitious symbol. It's a combination of bad luck, sexual frustration, sexual predation, and the great unknowns of the sea. Yes, there is a touch of Lovecraft. It could not be avoided. And I am okay with that. Anyway, this is not a boner show, and we don't talk about boners here. I want to talk about the fetish as something that creates paranoia, and in fact, all paranormalism in the film as creating paranoia. The fetish returns a few times throughout to establish young man's increasing isolation and anxiety, but at the ending we get a short thesis about the impact it had on his mind.
Said he went mad. You made him mad. With the charm. The screws all trinket. Well, I broke, see? See? Now I'm free. And I'm free from your designs. Now I got it all figured out. Except what's the secret mischief you're keeping? Up there! Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Tommy.
Now, this is not false, as far as we know. We are told the young man found the fetish inside his mattress back in the first handful of scenes. So, this isn't something he invented because of mental illness or something. It is true. But his connection between it and what transpires in the film is not necessarily true. Or is it? Next, some more bad luck. It's bad luck to leave a toast unfinished, lad. Apparently. And when he dumps the alcohol, he immediately drinks the poop water. That's just how it works. And of course, he inevitably beat the piss out of this seabird, which then inevitably leads to bad luck.
Will you kill me like you done that gull? I did! Liar! You murdering dog! 'Twas ye what changed the wind on us. 'Twas ye what damned us, dog, 'twas ye!
You could also draw a connection between this and Eddie's previous murder, which is explained through conversation. When he was a littler Eddie, he was working for a logging company and refused to save the life of someone he didn't know.
I just stood there is all, just stood. Watched him get swallowed by them logs. And all I could think when he was done was, I could use me a smoke. And that's it.
Tom? Tom? Why'd you spill your beans, dummy? Why'd you spill your beans? Why'd you spill your beans?
Whether this is murder or not is sort of Trolley-esque, but the point is that it weighs on Edward like a murder. Perhaps the logger wasn't a sailor or a seabird, but the trauma it gave him can feel like a curse. What's all this about? Why are we getting these strange signals of spirituality and superstition and cause and effect? I think it's because one of the core theses of the film is the question of where our own control over our universe begins and ends. Simply asking this question is postmodern. Knockoff Daniel Plainview here represents, to some extent, a modernist. A fully realized person with doubts and insecurities and flaws and traumas trying to justify his circumstances. He wants to believe that this fetish was planted by this man to create bad luck, so that he can believe that the universe has order, a villain and a hero. But although we can be lulled into this conclusion by the Congress of the evidence, ultimately we know it's absurd that killing a seagull will cause bad luck. So is there a grand narrative, or are our minds playing tricks on us? And if it's the latter, does that truly make that grand narrative false? This is the most interesting read of the film to me. If this myth of evil is only in the mind of Water for Elephants here, that doesn't make it any more or less real. In fact, if he believes it to be true, then it and its ultimate consequence are inevitable. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, or a conspiracy that covers itself up using doubt and misinformation. Because young man hates old man has to be the cause of all the evil in the film. And the film eagerly supports this, again drawing a broad, fuzzy line between paranormal and paranoia.
To 4 weeks.
At the beginning of the film, the pair of boys celebrate the fact that they will only have to put up with one another for 4 weeks. That's basically nothing, right? 4 weeks have already passed since the beginning of this enormous video essay, after all. But, just like time flies when you're having fun, time blends together into a soup of mid-mornings and evenings when you're bored. Although things flare up between Boy A and Boy B from time to time, especially at nights when they actually talk to each other, or like when this happens.
And if I tells you to pull up and apart every floorboard and cupboard of this here house and scour 'em down with your bare bleeding knuckles, you'll do it! And if I tells you to yank out every single nail from every mould and nail hole and suck off every speck of rust till all them nails sparkle like a sperm whale's pecker, and then carpenter the whole light station back together from scrap and then do it all over again, you'll do it! And by God and by golly, you'll do it, smiling lad, because you like it. You like it because I says you will.
Most of the time, it's very clear that Handlebar over here is just doing chores and growing increasingly isolated. Testing! What keeps us interested is watching it happen, the dramatic irony dragging us into the story because we can give a pretty good guess as to how it's going to play out. But the Lighthouse lads don't have that luxury. The days blend together, time passes, and then, about halfway through the movie, it's time to go. It's time to leave the lighthouse. And that's when you, the very model of a modern major general, realize that something's about to go down. And down it do go.
They didn't come. Look, maybe the tender did come. We just missed her is all. I can take the dory out.
Weeks, Winslow, weeks.
What?
What do you mean, what?
Weeks.
Weeks, aye, weeks.
We slept in, dead drunk.
It's been weeks ago since we missed her, Winslow. And I've been asking you to ration for weeks now, too, but you kept barking at me like a mad dog, saying you can take the dory out.
Oh, look here.
Oh, no, don't be losing your head now.
Hold up. Hold on. Hold your horses. That doesn't make any sense, Willem Big Dick Dafoe. You really think that the ferry that comes to the island to take people off the island and put new people on the island would sit there and wait for the people to come out of the lighthouse and then go, well, I guess they're staying there for another couple weeks and then leave? I do not think so. You are being a silly fella. Even if we were to believe that Willem Dafoe purposefully told the ferry people that they were going to stay longer because he gets turned on by the Fresnel lens, it's still basically outside of his jurisdiction to do that. And this is where the film supports the idea that this circumstance is a metaphor. Because although it lies a bit outside of the reality of the film, it plays perfectly into the themes of the film. Fundamentally, these characters are attempting to escape something. As we learn in their backstories, Bungus here let a man die, and Bornpo here was forced to abandon the only life he knew because of an injury. Bornpo has found his replacement in the Fresnel lens, but refuses to share it. Bungus is angry about it. But although their past weighs on them heavily, they persist, albeit with a new desire for fulfillment. This test of personal strength may have ended prematurely if everything had worked out. But it didn't. The boat either didn't come, or was lost in the storm, or left, and the two must attempt to continue living despite one another. Sometimes life tests, but most people, if they know the test is coming, prepare for it. They enter the test confident, especially if there's a huge significance to it. They say, I'm ready. It's going to be difficult, but I'm going to get through this and overcome this problem. And they have no trouble in the beginning. But then it runs too long. The test continues, and they realize this was a foolish thing to face head-on, but now they must persist. And it continues, and it continues. If this film truly is about the Chapel Perilous, the cataclysmic event which proves devotion or destroys it, then its challenge is boredom and forced contact with conflict. If we've determined that the virtue is persistence, then what is the prize? Well, Eduardo already answered that for you. Perhaps it's purity, or love, or wealth, or happiness. Or perhaps it's just something that people want and no further detail is needed. Perhaps it is a corrupting force. Or perhaps it's only viewed that way by those who don't have it. Perhaps its guard is real, or a figment of our imagination. The point is, this is represented by a giant light bulb, and the question is it worth it? I think maybe not. Let's connect these observations together because they do slot pretty nicely into a neat little thesis. Evil and conflict, whether external or projected, do happen. Bad things do happen. But life persists regardless of that. This is illustrated, as I mentioned, in the backstories of our main characters. We have a sea dog who lost the sea to an injury, and an ex-logger who is running from his past. The past only he knows about. In the film, after the two make it quite clear that they do not like each other, they're stuck with one another anyway. They persist, and so does life after conflict. How will a person behave when they must survive after committing or witnessing cruelty? More importantly, if they are taunted with something that they believe fulfills them, can they resist and find true happiness? Well, apparently not, but it's like a cautionary tale or something. Don't jerk off to light bulbs. Ah! Oh! Okay, fun post-credits, non-scripted. Ready? Just like last time. Welcome to my third video essay. It's about the movie. I wrote it literally in January, and it is March. It's been a bad February for a number of reasons. And I do have other projects, but I'm not going to stop doing these. Anyway, if you're new to the channel, like and subscribe, or I will enter your home and dip all of your bread in water. Goodbye.